to this side event, Message from a Frozen Planet, the global impacts of cryosphere. My name is Heidi Silvestre. I'm Deputy Secretary of AMA, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, and I will have the pleasure to moderate this side event. To open this session, I would like to invite Arctic Ambassador, Chair of the Arctic Council, Morten Høglund from Norway. Morten, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heidi. Excellencies, distinguished speakers and guests. The changing cryosphere impacts us all, regardless if you live in the vicinity of ice, on frozen ground, or at the shores of a rising sea. If you depend on sea ice for hunting or the fresh water supplied by glaciers. The cryosphere also plays a crucial stabilizing role in the climate system. So directly or indirectly, we will all feel the implications when our frozen world continues to melt. On behalf of Norway and our chairship of the Arctic Council, I am both grateful and encouraged to bring the cryosphere to this climate conference, together with a strong group of co-organizers and contributors that reflect the multitude of impacts of a melting cryosphere. We are stepping into a critical and unpredictable new phase of the climate crisis. Extreme weather events have affected communities across the globe, and as we will hear in this session today, changes in our cryosphere are contributing to and amplifying the risks of flooding, droughts, fires, landslide, coastal erosion. One of the regions that is changing most rapidly is the Arctic. It is warming 3 times faster than the global average. The Arctic Council's Monitoring and Assessment Program will present its 2024 climate report here tomorrow. It shows that observational data give evidence of widespread loss of the Arctic cryosphere in all its forms. Spring snow cover extent, sea ice, land ice, including the Greenland ice sheet, and Arctic glaciers, as well as warming and thawing of permafrost. The Arctic is becoming wetter, with more precipitation falling as rainfall rather than snowfall, and an overall increase in precipitation totals. These changes are already today threatening homes and livelihoods, often impacting indigenous peoples disproportionately, given that they face a multitude of external compounding threats. Melting ice and a shorter ice season have cascading effects that impact livelihoods, culture, and ways of life. The accelerated warming and its impact on the global cryosphere require urgent climate change mitigation and adaptation measures at all levels. We must support efforts to build resilience in cryosphere-dependent communities and encourage further work to identify and share best practices to address these challenges. We need to enhance our efforts to meet the long-term temperature goals and ensure the effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. Reducing emissions of greenhouse gases and short-lived climate forces is crucial to slowing the global temperature rise. This is the only way to prevent irreversible regional and global impacts from the loss of the cryosphere. The Arctic Council is the premier forum for cooperation in the Arctic. It brings together national policymakers, indigenous peoples' representatives, and knowledge holders, and researchers from across the Arctic and beyond. As such, it is uniquely placed to develop knowledge and networks that can inform our actions and empower the inhabitants of the Arctic. But climate change and its impacts know no borders, and no single state or people can tackle these challenges alone. I will therefore reiterate that I'm grateful to the co-organizers and contributors of this event for joining us in bringing the important message of a melting cryosphere to Baku. I would like to thank our co-organizers and contributors Pakistan, Nepal, Chile, Germany, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD, the World Meteorological Organization, the Climate Policy Center, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, Met Norway and Norway Space Agency, and my special thanks goes to the Arctic Council Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program and the International Climate and Biosphere Initiative, who have provided invaluable support to the Norwegian chairship in organizing this event. I'm now very pleased to give the floor, or rather the screen, to the Prime Minister of Norway for his remarks.
As Norwegian Prime Minister during our chairmanship of the Arctic Council, I'm so happy to welcome you all to this event, setting melting ice and its global impacts on this critical agenda. I am pleased that the polar and high mountain regions have joined forces in amplifying the message on the CO2's critical role. Scientists are clear, changes to a frozen world impact every living being on the Earth. The disappearing cryosphere means rising seas, loss of water, accelerated warming, extreme weather, and profound disruptions to all life. And we know that the consequences are impacting communities and ecosystems worldwide, around the globe. So our panel will dive deeper into this, we have to. But first, consider these serious Arctic zones. Summer sea ice has shrunk by 43% over 30 years, at almost all the years in this century thus far. Ice loss is widespread, with Greenland driving global sea level rise. And thawing permafrost will release 50 to 200 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. So, friends, in the Arctic, indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable, forced to relocate due to coastal erosion, floods, wildfires. The impacts extend beyond the Arctic, affecting people and environments everywhere. We must leverage scientific research and indigenous knowledge to tackle these issues. To slow irreversible climate change, we must do what it takes to keep global temperatures below 1.5 centigrade. So let us not forget, climate change is a global responsibility, largely man-made. All countries must do their part in reducing emissions, and real global efforts will have real impacts on the cryosphere. So today, we are, and I am particularly pleased to stand together with Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, all countries affected in different ways by the disappearing cryosphere. I hope you will be successful in your deliberations. We have a common cause, and we will set the agenda and try to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister and Mr. Morton. I would now like to invite Minister Maria Rojas, Minister of the Environment and Agriculture, Chile, for opening remarks. Minister, and first. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this event. First day of COP, right? First day of for beyond 2 weeks. We hope that we can come together as we always do. It is an honor to deliver this welcoming remarks on behalf of the ambition on melting ice, group high report on sea level rise and non-water resources, because these three aspects are intimately linked. This ambition on melting ice was established at COP27. The main purpose of this informal group of countries is to raise awareness and provide more visibility to the scientific evidence of the impacts of climate change in the forest area. Chile has committed to share this role because of our strong links with the forest region. We are an Antarctic country, and our territories have extensive presence of glaciers along the mountain of the Andes, including the remnants Patagonian ice sheet from the last glacier. Chile has actively engaged with scientific research in climate, focusing on environmental protection, monitoring the effects of climate change, and the preservation of the unique Antarctic species. This research contributes to global understanding of climate processes and ecological changes as well. It's not just about ice and Antarctica, it's about very unique ecosystem that gives life to also very unique species that are being
rapid change that we see there as well. We just heard the changes that we have for a long time now seen in the Arctic. We all have known that the Arctic is a global warming hotspot and everything that had happened there. And sea ice for a long time was not showing the same dynamics around Antarctica. But in the last 2 years, we have also started to see a very, very worryingly and rapid decrease in Antarctic sea ice. And it was last year and this year again. So some of the most severe consequences of melting ice is, of course, sea level rise, but also habitat destruction of ecosystems, reduction of access to fresh water, release of methane emissions from permafrost, among other disruptive impacts, and also the possibility of disasters associated with those loss of ice when it occurs in a rapid way. In just the 2 years since this ambition of melting ice group creation, new cryosphere science has sharpened the need for urgent and transformative climate action by 2030. We see that our current emission trajectory is very worrying for extreme and irreversible economic, social, and environmental impact throughout the planet. I'm going to go a bit faster, I guess. Although the impacts that we're seeing and experiencing in the cryosphere regions are alarming, we still have time to make a course correction aligned with the global stocktake of last year's outcome. The only way to mitigate and prevent these global impacts from cryosphere loss is through a swift reduction in carbon emissions aligned with the Paris Agreement temperature goal of 1.5. This target remains achievable, but it requires the adoption of fully 1.5 aligned national determined contributions that we are all preparing for next year's COPs, 10 years of the Paris Agreement. In the absence of bold, decisive mitigation action, global cryosphere will continue to thaw and melt, with irreversible and widespread global losses as a result. A planet with less or no cryosphere is a very different planet of what we know by humanity throughout its existence. So let's work together to avoid the worst of the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maisa. Thank you so much, Minister. We'll now move to 3 presentations that will give you an overview of how the cryosphere is responding to climate change, and in turn, how changes in the cryosphere are impacting human beings. And I have the pleasure of starting with the first presentation. I'll be very honest with you all. I've been reflecting a lot actually about this presentation. And you know, this is actually my 6th COP, and I feel that this is probably the 1000th time that I'm repeating the same message over and over again, only getting worse. It's terrifying what's happening to the cryosphere today. And you know what's even more terrifying? Is how much we're going to be impacted by loss of cryosphere. So let's begin. Can I have my slides, please? Thank you very much. If you can have it in presentation mode, please. Okay, I'll begin. Please give us a second. It's coming. I can see it. I can feel it. As you know, the cryosphere is a very visual topic. So that's why we really need those visuals to come up the screen.
So there's a cable. Can you do? Yeah, there's a USB-C to A cable. So I'll need that, and then the second you need.
Apologies again. Hopefully the slides will come up very, very soon.
I think it'll be right. No. Yeah, it could be over
In
there.
the meantime, if you can please join me in thanking Minister Maïssa Rojas, who has to, unfortunately, to leave us to go to a very important meeting. So thank you again so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, technical team, for putting up the slides on the screen. So my presentation, to give an overview of how the cryosphere is responding to climate change, is how many more warnings, how many more lives, before we stop pretending that we care about ice. So I've been asked to start the presentation with an overview of the causes of climate change. So let's put the second slide, please. So as you know today, spoiler alerts, the response, the drivers of climate change is truly fossil fuels. And in 1982, there was a report that connected the burning of fossil fuels with CO2 emissions and rising temperatures. And what the report showed us is that back in the 80s, they mapped out a potential path humanity could take if only we would continue burning huge amounts of fossil fuels. And guess what? We're actually bang on this trajectory. This report also pointed out that there would be some regions warming faster than others and that the melting polar ice would increase sea levels around the world. This report is from ExxonMobil, and I think we can really thank them for this remarkable piece of work. They had great scientists at the time, but we can't really thank them and the rest of Big Gas, Big Four, for the global misinformation campaign they launched afterwards, casting doubt on the origins of climate change. So back to the cryosphere. Ice responds very quickly to climate changes. For example, mountain glaciers. Here on the picture is my great-grandmother in France, in the French mountains, on the largest French glacier in 1916. Here is how much remains of the glacier today. 2 billion people on Earth use meltwater from glaciers as a seasonal source of water. Here in Baku, 26% of the annual freshwater supply from Baku comes from melting snow and ice. This is how important the cryosphere is. Glaciers don't just peacefully melt and retreat. Sometimes they also catastrophically collapse, such as this accident that happened in the Dolomites 2 years ago. 11 people died that day when a pocket of water ruptured, creating a tsunami in this very mountains. If we continue along our path down the cryosphere,
Next slide, please. Permafrost also responds very quickly to raising temperatures. Permafrost is the frozen ground, covers 23% of the land masses in the Northern Hemisphere. The more temperatures rise, next slide, please, the more permafrost releases greenhouse gases. If we reach 1.6 degrees of temperature increase, permafrost will emit as much greenhouse gases as the country of India through the end of the century. If we reach 2 degrees, the emissions from permafrost will be about as large as those from the EU. If we reach 3 degrees, about as large as those from the US. Just to make myself very clear here, it would be effectively as if we were adding another India, another EU, another US to our planet. Sea ice also suffers a lot from increasing temperatures. Sea ice is the ice that you find permanently present in the Arctic, covering a very dark ocean. What's great about sea ice is that it's a very wide, vast expanse of ice that reflects solar radiation back into space. As the Prime Minister said, in 40 years, we've lost 40% of the extent of Arctic sea ice and 3/4 of its volume. Just again, to be very clear, if we lose Arctic sea ice, not only we will catalyze the warming of the Arctic, but we will also threaten the stability of the entire climate system. Continuing now on to, next slide, please. Our ice sheets. We have 2 ice sheets on Earth, Greenland to the left and Antarctica to the south. Both of these ice sheets are responding extremely rapidly to climate change, and this is having significant contributions to sea level rise. But I will let my neighbor here, James, tell you more about sea level rise in a few minutes. Our oceans are key pillars of our climate system. If you look at the cold waters from the Arctic and Antarctica, they are actually very efficient at absorbing CO2, but this comes at a very high cost. It makes these waters more acidic, more corrosive. We really need to ask ourselves how much more corrosive we want these waters to get, given how much we rely on these oceans today. So the time is absolutely critical for the polar oceans. And speaking of our oceans and global ocean circulation, scientists have recently suggested that we might be on the verge of a collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. The consequences would be very clear. It would be a dramatic cooling of certain parts of the world, especially Northern Europe, a cooling so fast that we might not even be able to adapt to it. So to conclude, well, it's very simple. The best way to save the cryosphere and to save ourselves is to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. How do we do this? Well, it means that we will need to reduce our emissions by at least 42% by 2030. But to be honest, of course, every ton of CO2 we can avoid matters. Every 1/10 of a degree truly matters. And I will leave you with this. How many more warnings, how many more lives before we find the political courage to give ourselves a fighting chance. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So next is Dr. James Kirkham, who is right here, Chief Science Advisor of AMI, Ambition on Melting Ice.
Thank you, Heidi. It's my pleasure to talk to you about sea level rise today. Can I have my slides up, please? In presentation mode, please. Perfect. Thank you so much. Right. So Earth has 2 ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica. And the first thing you will need to know is that they are gigantic, literally gigantic. So I put a map of Europe onto Antarctica here for scale. So we've got Europeans in the room, or if you've never been to Europe, please locate your country, look at the scale, And then imagine your country being covered by a layer of ice that's 4 kilometers high. Then you get an idea of the scale of the ice that's in these ice sheets. The second thing you need to know is just how quickly these places are changing. So these headlines from the news are all from the last year, and the news is not good. Everything is accelerating. We're seeing extremes we've not seen before, with massive knock-on impacts on the rest of the planet. Now, the reason that we are seeing all these events so quickly now is that the cryosphere and the polar regions in general are warming faster than anywhere else in the world. So we're currently warmed by 1.3 degrees overall globally, but the Arctic we've got on now is warming at 4 times the global average, whilst Antarctica is about twice the speed of the rest of the world. This amplified warming has accelerated the melting of our ice sheets. So the videos you're seeing here show the loss of the ice over the last 3 decades, and anything red is bad here. The rate in Greenland on the left is now 5 times higher, and in Antarctica it's 25% higher than it was in the early 1990s. Next slide, please. Oh, wait. This has caused sea level rise to now rise twice as fast as it was 30 years ago. Sea level is now rising twice as fast. And this is already having massive knock-on damage. So because we've been pumping fossil fuel pollution into the atmosphere for a very long time now, this is already costing lives and vast sums of money. This is because it is amplifying the damage we're already seeing in extreme weather events, the extreme storm surges that have devastated US coastlines in the hurricane season in recent weeks. Now, scientists are getting really good at showing that the sea level rise we've already had because of this fossil fuel pollution is adding billions of dollars onto the bill when we have these individual storms and hurricanes. And in the example of Hurricane Sandy, the sea level rise we have now experienced made the difference that caused Lower Manhattan to be flooded. Now, with these costs in mind, scientists are really worried because our ice sheets are vulnerable to a series of vicious amplifying cycles. So in this video, you see how Greenland has become thinner over the last 30 years, with areas in red lowering down about 20 meters in places. And as the ice lowers down, it brings the ice into warmer air temperatures, which then means further melting, further lowering in a vicious cycle. Now, moving to Antarctica, scientists are really concerned about what we call ice shelves, which are the yellow areas you see here. And this is because these ice shelves are holding back all of the ice in the middle from that gigantic ice sheet wanting to flow out to the ocean and contribute to sea level rise. And we're beginning to see substantial ice shelf melting because the ocean is warming, particularly in the pink areas in this map. And if I overlay the patterns of the ice mass loss we saw earlier, you will see that the fastest areas of ice loss are occurring where the water is warmest. And this is really worrying because if we were to take away all that ice to look at the land the ice is sitting on beneath, we see that the areas that are losing the ice the fastest are in these really deep marine basins. Now, this is a big problem because ice sheets, when they retreat into these deep basins, once it starts, the ice cannot stop. It goes backwards and backwards, it retreats more and more, and you end up with irreversible sea level rise that will last for centuries at a faster and faster rate. So how much will sea level rise in the future? I've got 3 things to say to you on this. Number 1, some amount of irreversible sea level rise is now locked in because of our actions we've already taken today. But number 2, exactly how much we get and how fast is still our choice. With the 1.5 compatible pathway, we can limit sea level rise to 0.5 meter by 2100 and 1 to 3 meters by 2300. However, our current emissions pathway will lead us to 1 meter by 2100 and could be 6 or 7 meters by 2300. But you can't adapt to that. Thirdly, if these ice sheets continue to accelerate and become more unstable, all of these timelines will be brought forward faster. And in that scenario, we could see 1 meter in the next 50 years, 3 meters in the early 2100s, and up to 15 meters by 2300. Now, if you think you're sitting there thinking this all sounds way too far away, you're completely wrong. And this is because in many parts of the world, just 10 centimeters of sea level rise will make coastal flooding happen 10 times more often. Many of your countries in the room have also been investing huge amounts of money into nature-based adaptation solutions. They're brilliant. They can sequester carbon, they defend against coastal erosion, and they're great for biodiversity. But these solutions are living ecosystems, and they can only cope with so much. And so under current policies, the areas you see that are red in this map will not be able to keep up with the rapid sea level rise. So these ecosystems will drown. And this means that any money you're pouring into these adaptation solutions will essentially be stranded, a waste of money. Finally, we're talking about the irreversible damage caused by the inundation of countries. This is the Bahamas under 1 meter of sea level rise. This amount is now inevitable by mid-2300s, but could occur in the next 50 years if current emissions continue. By 3 meters, the island is gone. Similarly, Europe is massively exposed to just 1 meter of sea level rise. Take, for example, Hamburg, massively influenced at 1 meter, devastated at 3. Similarly, Copenhagen in Denmark, 1 meter, very, very bad. 3 meters, the airport goes underwater. How much will it cost you to move the airport and also relocate those people on that island? Valencia in Spain at 1 meter, very bad at 3. Next slide, please. We've all seen the floods in Valencia recently. It cost billions to repair. But what do you do when the rain or the water no longer comes from the sky, but from the sea? And there's no way of stopping it. It won't just be these countries, also have the biggest emitters. China's and Shanghai at 3 meters, and Miami at 3 meters, they're gone. And also the least developed country being massively hit by this is Karachi in Pakistan at 1 meter and 3 meters. Dhaka in Bangladesh at 1 meter, and by 3 meters, it becomes an island. You have to move the city. Finally, 5 key conclusions. I'm going to leave you with the last one. It's the most important. And this is really that we can still decide how much sea level rise we'll get and how fast. But these decisions are being made by policies that you are setting now. Please make the right choice for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. So next is Sarah Osvik, Chair of ICC, Inuit Circumpolar Council. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Buenak lumang kakusarita aktisu sa katasud aktisu katasud so nam na siga putuna aktisu sa aktivisu moksina si mamet. Thank you for organizing this event, and as a co-organizer I also want to express my gratitude to the cooperation we've had in organizing this important side event. The Inuit Circumpolar Council is an indigenous peoples organization representing Inuit in the Arctic. We are an indigenous people living across 4 very different nation states: Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. We join the Sami people and other peoples of the Arctic in being co-founders of the Arctic Council, which truly is a governance body that has a unique structure in as it's a body that consists of 8 Arctic state members and 6 permanent participants who are the Arctic indigenous peoples. And this body, the Arctic Council, is a very important forum for us to produce knowledge about climate change, but also about how to manage solid waste, how to prevent suicide, how to make the lives better and healthier for the people who live in the Arctic. And our contribution to an event on cryosphere is to bring the very important message that we are a people of the cryosphere, and that you cannot talk about cryosphere, you cannot write about cryosphere, and you cannot decide on declarations or resolutions on cryosphere if indigenous peoples are not part of that, and if indigenous peoples' rights are not fully recognized in those texts. We have seen how the UN General Assembly has passed a resolution on a decade of action for cryospheric sciences, where indigenous peoples are mentioned one, and I excuse my bluntness, tokenistic time, where the rights of indigenous peoples are not mentioned once, where human rights are not mentioned once. And that is the thing we see when people that are not including indigenous peoples in decision-making are coming up with decisions and texts are doing that happen again and again and again. And that's why indigenous peoples have been here at the UN. For more than 100 years, since it was a League of Nations, indigenous peoples have knocked on the door, requesting and asking to be recognized as equal to the nation states. Only many, many years after the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted by a high number of the UN member states, 143 actually, only 4 voted against and 11 abstentions at that time, and later more have joined the UN Declaration. And the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is your tool. Whatever text or declaration or resolution or policy or decision-making you're making, this is your tool to ensure that the rights of indigenous peoples are then implemented into whatever is done. The text of the declaration is so clear. Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making. Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination, and by virtue of that right, determine their own economic, cultural, and social future. Those rights are so clear. Yet we see time and time again that even the UN fails at implementing its own declaration in its new resolutions and texts. Here at the UNFCCC, indigenous peoples, establishing a facilitative working group where we do have a small access to include indigenous knowledge holders into the work on climate change. And why is that important? Well, because if the world only bases its decisions on Western scientific knowledge, it fails to include a holistic inclusion of all knowledge systems, even in work to mitigate climate change, to adapt to climate change, not least, and also on making sure that the knowledge production is representative of those peoples that it's about. So we have worked for decades and decades to ensure that the indigenous peoples are part of the decision-making and part of the knowledge production. And when we see resolutions and declarations and texts that do not recognize the knowledge of indigenous peoples or the rights of indigenous peoples, it's a huge step back. So cryosphere, the pictures, and I'm very, very much in agreement that it's a very visual area, that you need to see the numbers, you need to see the way that ice moves and how it has changed over the past years. Cryosphere for us translates to rights. Cryosphere for us translates to our infrastructure. The fact that our land is frozen makes our land our infrastructure. The fact that our sea ice is there in the winter makes our sea and the ice on it our infrastructure. So when it melts, it is literally the ground underneath ourselves that is melting. Recently, I was in Alaska at the Alaska Federation of Natives, a big conference with 7,000 people gathering to discuss policymaking in Alaska. And I witnessed how a lot of the delegates left one day early because a storm was coming in the north, also a part of Inuit land, a part of our homeland. And the next day, we saw the news of how Kotzebue was flooded because the waves were bigger, the storm was stronger, and the melting of the thaw permafrost made the coastline much weaker. We saw how the whole landing strip was flooded, creating a state of emergency, as there was no way to get there when the landing strip was not in function. Last year, in my own homeland in Galassinunat, we saw how the sea ice didn't settle. What consequences did that have? That had the consequence that families in the north lost their access to go hunting, to go exercise their livelihoods, to sustain themselves economically and in terms of health. So the government of Greenland had to reach to its own catastrophe funds to support these families. A few years ago at the previous COPs, we also had a youth delegate with us who told us of some of the other losses and damages. He lives on a small island in the Disco Bay, and the fact that the ice doesn't settle anymore and is not safe to travel on, for him also means the loss of knowledge, because his grandfather cannot teach him the knowledge of going hunting from the ice. It also meant the loss of his livelihood for half a year, because he has to leave and live in a different town for half a year, where he can actually live from fisheries, since he could not live from hunting. So these examples hopefully give you a very clear message of why cryosphere is directly linked to the rights of indigenous peoples, and why indigenous peoples must be at the table when decision-making is done on cryosphere, and why any text developed on cryosphere must include a very clear recognition and call for implementation of the rights of indigenous peoples as affirmed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'll keep it here and continue during the dialogue.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So please give a big hand for the speakers. And I will now invite on stage all the speakers who are participating in the rest of the session. Please join us here on stage. And I will now give the floor to Dr. Pema Gimacho, who is the Director General of ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. Dr. Pema, yes, this is perfect. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I have the slides, please. You can give it. I would like to be ambassador for a while. So good afternoon, everybody. And I think, where do I see my slides? Okay, there. So I'm not going to be talking about what the earlier speakers spoke already about science. I think the scientists provide us with the insights, with the scientific evidence that we all know now. The ice is melting, the cryosphere is disappearing, and all that. So I'm going to be talking about the perspective from the inhabitants, because the inhabitants are feeling the impact. They're the one losing because of the deprivation, I would say. Because first of all, we know what is happening. Science has told us what is happening. We know why it is happening. And we also know that we have enough evidence, enough data to act now. But we still continue doing what we do. So it is in a form taking away all these goods and services that the cryosphere provides. So I'm going to be talking about the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. Is talking about the lives and livelihood of around 2 billion people. So where do I get the slide moving? Yeah, it's coming. Okay, so we are talking about this region. This is how it looks like. The Hindu Kush Himalayan, the tallest mountain ranges in the world, and home to some 54,000 glaciers. I won't repeat, too much, but let us see. So when we talk about the Hindu Kush Himalayas, we are not talking about 240 million people just living in the mountains or in the valleys in the mountains. We are talking about another 1.6 billion people living downstreams in the valleys and the river basins that rivers from the Hindu Kush Himalayas provide with water, with energy, with food production, and all these services that comes with it. So downstream impacts, I'm going to focus much more on downstream impact, because upstream we have already heard from the earlier speakers what is happening, and the story is the same. So we are talking about benefits that flow beyond the mountains. When 10 of Asia's largest rivers originate from the Hindu Kush Himalayas, what does this mean in supporting the lives and livelihood of some 1.6 billion people living downstream? So, source of energy, the clean energy source from hydropower. Countries like Nepal, Bhutan are investing heavily in hydropower. But can we sustain that? And these are the sources for powering our green transition, for powering our industries, and also for powering our transport. So without the rivers, without the water flowing in the rivers, the energy transition ambitions would be lost. Food production. Again, people downstream depend on the waters from the Himalayan rivers, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra. They all feed the agriculture production system in these areas downstream. And of course, don't forget, sometimes we overlook the aquatic biodiversity. The fish that is also very much part of the food chain of the people living in these basins. I think you have to warn me when I run out of time. So health and sanitation, I don't want to, stress too much. Everybody knows what could he have done if there was no water during the pandemic. So that itself tells the story. So with this. Okay, livelihoods. It's not just about water for drinking, water for energy, water for food production, livelihoods. Many people depend on tourism, on the kind of recreation and tourism services, the opportunities that rivers provide, for rafting, for swimming and tourism, and also river transport and so on. Okay, 2 minutes. I'll go. And also biodiversity. Sometimes we forget, we talk about biodiversity as it is isolated or separate from climate change impact. Where would the Asiatic elephants go for drinking water or for washing themselves, giving themselves a bath? They go to the rivers. And if there are no water in the rivers, they would be affected. But the story is that, as I said in the beginning, these benefits may not last very long if we don't act now. So all of us from the region and across the globe should, take action now. The communities are already suffering the brunt of the climate change impacts. The glacial lake outburst floods are increasing. Now we have something like 200 potentially dangerous glacial lakes in that region, but only 5 have monitoring stations. Imagine that. Millions of people are exposed to globe threats. And flash floods, we had experienced earlier this year across the region, flash floods, which have destroyed lands and property. This is an example of the globe last year in Sikkim, India. Huge devastation and infrastructure that has been built just a few years ago wiped away in a matter of few hours. And this year, near the Mount Everest region, the Thami Glacial Lake outburst flood, again, similar effect. So the snow cover is changing, the meltwater is being affected, and we are really, the inhabitants there are really struggling to cope up with it. So I think it's time for everyone to come together and take action, and I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you very much. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pema. I would now like to invite Honorable Mr. Ahmed Atik Anwar, Member of the Parliament, Parliamentary Secretary for Climate Change from Pakistan. Thank you so much for being with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I will just continue as my colleague just left because we do share the same mountains, same the rivers that we get in Pakistan, the Indus River, and we know that long history of our Indus civilization comes through that, and the population we live there is very much dependent on these waters. And I just want to mention we are at the brunt of this climate change. In 2 years back in 2022, the 40% of our country was underwater due to the floods. One of the glaciers had a flash flood. One of the barriers broke, and it flooded our 40% of the country. And now we have millions of people internally displaced and refugees in their own country. So it is very close to us, to our heart, how this climate change, how the rise in temperature is affecting my people and the world as all. So as we have tried, our government with international community help, we have tried to set up early detection programs like GLOF, try to get information like what locations where these glaciers are moving, melting, and where the water is accumulating, and how we can have early warning so we can save lives, very important lives. But the problem we are facing right now is a scientific one. At up to 5,000 meters, we have the climate centers where we can detect. But once we go up above, we don't have that kind of technology. And that's where we are looking to the Western side world and the scientist community to help us and guide us in that so we can save not just lives, but the livelihood of our people. And as I just want to add one more thing, that these, as my colleague mentioned earlier, 2 billion people are dependent on this area. This is probably the largest, we should call, the largest cryosphere outside the poles, which is this Himalayas and the Karakoram Mountains. It's massive, and it is at this time melting at a very, very fast speed. And we need right now to take action on this. And I hope that people who have this kind of technology will help us and guide us so we can save the people, the livelihood of agriculture, the food security is tied to this as well. Because we are an agricultural country and we are dependent on the water of these rivers. And if that goes out and if the floods comes in, and we lost, last time I remember, 2 years back, we lost 40% of food production with these floods. And that resulted in food insecurity. We have to work on this. As my colleague earlier was talking about, this is not a regional problem. This is a global problem. This is one of those issues that we all have to come together. We all have to stand together on this, because global warming happening or climate changing happening at one end of the globe will not stay there. It will affect every one of us. And I think that's what we are here for. And hopefully what we haven't done in the past, we can do it today and in the coming future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I would now like to invite Honorable Dr. Anna Lohmann, Minister of State for Europe and Climate from Germany. Thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me and the opportunity to sign the MI declaration at this very important side event. And just let me start with some personal notes. I mean, this is the second day of COP now, and I'm really at this point shocked and devastated by how on every panel I am, every conversation I have, everyone has to share a heartbreaking story about how the climate crisis already affect the livelihoods of their people at home, right? From Pakistan to the Arctic, to Spain. Just met the Spanish Prime Minister, had a meeting with a delegate from Kazakhstan who told me about the most dramatic floods ever recorded in history. I mean, we're really in the middle of it and have to use this COP to get our act together, particularly also with regards now to the cryosphere that we're talking about here. And when we think about it, endless words of snow and ice come to our mind, especially now that the weather gets a bit colder again. And yes, Germany is a part of this world also, with snow-covered mountains and glaciers, at least until now. That's what we have to say. We're already experiencing and seeing the impacts of global warming as well in my home country. The white and icy world that I know from my childhood is shrinking dramatically. We still have 4 glaciers left in Germany. And I have to emphasize this word still, because in September 2022, we lost 1. The Südlicher Schneeferner lost the status of a glacier due to a lack of mass. It lost 94% since the 1980s. This happened after a hot summer. The high temperatures in summer are the central threat to the German glaciers, not less snowfall as one might assume. But now, due to climate change, due to the climate crisis, temperature records are constant news, be it in the ocean, be it on land. And nowhere this can be seen better and clearer is by the melting and disappearing of glaciers, be it in the Himalayas or be it in the Alps in Germany. They are important indicators of the effects of the climate crisis in our regions. According to forecasts, most German glaciers could disappear by the middle of the 21st century if the current temperature rise continues. Some could even melt away earlier. And even if we're not an Arctic nation, we're obviously also affected by the effects of global warming. Germany will be significantly impacted by rising sea levels due to melting polar ice. Therefore, we have to join hands in the fight against the climate crisis. As MI partners, we're doing our utmost to get back on a 1.5-degree pathway. Because 1.5 is what we agreed on nationally within the EU and globally, and it's really the pain limit of our planet. Every step we take to come closer to this pathway counts, because every step we take to keep global warming as close as possible and below 1.5 degrees helps us to reduce the high risk of severe and potentially irreversible climate impacts with increased human suffering, drastic loss and damages, especially for vulnerable countries and communities. And it helps to secure a livable and sustainable future for us all. The AMI addresses that and so much more, and I'm happy that we're becoming a part of this ambitious group. With the signing of the AMI declaration, Germany wants to emphasize the ambition of our climate policy to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. And we also want to bring in Germany's leading role in polar science. We would like to highlight the three pillars of polar research: science, climate, and policy. Science. Germany is helping to take polar research to a new level with groundbreaking missions. We have a clear goal: more knowledge and more innovation. We will soon build a new research icebreaker, the new Polar Stern. For us, it is of special importance to transfer knowledge into practice and to offer our research infrastructure to collaboration with partners. Second, climate. We develop concrete solutions to combat climate change and to protect the cryosphere. We support leading scientists and institutes that create knowledge of all facets of the climate change. The information gained is made available to policymakers, and the scientific findings are incorporated into the reports of the IPCC. Third, when it comes to policy, we have to be clear. The principle of Arctic exceptionalism, the Arctic as a place of cooperation regardless of global developments, is currently being challenged. The federal government is committed to the peaceful use of the Arctic within the framework of the rules-based international order and founded on international law. We will closely work with allies and partners to guarantee security and stability in the region. The Arctic is not only a sensitive indicator of the climate crisis, but changes in the Arctic also do not just stay in the Arctic. That's why our research there is so important. The colleagues from the well-known Alfred Wegener Institute and many more show the nexus between Arctic research and climate research in their daily work. Given the changing framework of our engagement in the Arctic, the German government has adopted a new cross-government Arctic policy guideline on 18th of September of this year. Finally, to close, I want to illustrate with one wholesome example. Many of you have heard or maybe even participated, and then I would be curious to know that, in the impressive Mosaic exhibition. Anyone here has participated in this? Yay! Okay, let's chat about this later. It was the biggest Arctic exhibition so far. In autumn 2019, the German research vessel Polar Stern was frozen in the Arctic sea ice to drift with the ice through the Arctic Ocean for almost a year. And researchers from 20 nations set up their measuring stations on the ice flow around the ship. The researchers collected valuable data which help us to better understand the Arctic itself, but also what role its rapidly changing system plays for the European and the global climate. Therefore, once again, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to join such an important initiative. Germany is very much looking forward to contributing to the ambition in Melting Ice Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to our speakers. I would invite you to please actually regain your seats just down here in the room. We will see you again very soon, I believe. In the meantime, I would like to invite our next speakers for concluding remarks, key messages to share. So please, Kedrup, I would like to invite you to take the floor. Kedrup Dorji from Bhutan, Youth Ambassador to ICIMOD. Please share your remarks with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. I'm risking to repeat the messages that has been said so far, but I think this indicates how interconnected and important for us to work collaboratively on this issue. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good evening. Although Norway and partners here and the Himalayan regions are apart by distance, it is our shared commitment, cooperation and sacrifices in protecting our frozen heritage that binds us together more closely and intimately, particularly in this room. For the Himalayan region, and in particular, my mountainous country of Bhutan, the cryosphere is not only a frozen heritage, but also the source of lifeline for the downstream human settlements and many unique and key species of flora and fauna that plays critical role in regulating the climate in mountainous region. The cryosphere and mountain landscapes in my region are intertwined with the well-being of billions of people who rely on them for water, food, energy, and resources. My country's economy is highly dependent on glacier-fed and really climate-sensitive sectors such as hydropower, agriculture, forestry, and many more. However, despite being the world's first carbon-negative country, we live under the constant threat of climate change, and we have done nothing at all to bear the brunt of climate change and climate-induced catastrophes. Our glaciers are melting really fast as temperatures rise, raising water levels in the glacial lakes and magnifying the risk of an outburst flood. The threat to undo our environmental conservation efforts are alarmingly high. Therefore, the fight against climate change cannot be won without protecting our cryosphere and mountain ecosystems. Their degradation would accelerate global warming, creating a domino effect of environmental, social, and humanitarian disasters. There's a need for a coherent understanding of climate impacts on cryosphere and downstream communities, highlighting the importance of transboundary, regional, and global cooperation, including the need for systemic and integrated approaches to addressing climate challenges. The cryosphere must be given a due consideration in the global processes and act as a barometer for our planet's health to ensure the climate and social justice in the world. And we must act with urgency to tackle the adverse impacts of climate change. As much helpful as the support of countries like Norway and partners here to Himalayan region and my countries like Bhutan, the need to strengthen our cooperation and support to each other is more at this juncture than ever. And I request for forging partnerships, mobilizing resources, and advocating for sustainable policies and actions so we can ensure that our cryosphere and mountains continue to serve as a beacon of hope and resilience for generations to come. Let us act now to forge better partnerships and think of a better world for ourselves and future generations. Let us make this world a better place to live and tell success stories down the line. And the time is now or never. And I would like to wish every success and every achievement in our shared journey in fighting these common challenges affecting the world and across. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, I would now like to invite Sarah Osvik from ICC to join us again for a dialogue on the importance of cryosphere and how cryosphere impacts these very communities. Thank you very much for these heartfelt presentations. You are the people of cryosphere, the both of you. What would you say to the policymakers? What would be for you a key heartfelt message? You've already shared many, but the one thing you feel would resonate to the people who are in the room of negotiations right now in the plenary. The two of you, Sarah, would you like to start? Thank you.
Yes, Anna. Well, I think I have to repeat what I said in my presentation, that we must use and we must implement and in every way integrate a human rights-based approach to any policy making, including policies around the cryosphere. And in the Arctic, we have been able to have and build and sustain a governance model where we've been able to work together, even in difficult times, in a governance body such as the Arctic Council. And we are there to stay in the Arctic. There's a lot of settlers coming in and out. As indigenous peoples, and I'm sure it's the same way in other regions, we are so deeply connected and rooted in the lands and waters and sea and ice that we belong to, that there's for us no doubt that we will stay. So the question is, how can we ensure that there will be a systemic change in the way that we approach negotiations, in the way that we approach policy making, decision making, and science production, knowledge production, all over the globe and all over throughout the different bodies that we work on. Last year at the COP, the UN Secretary General pledged to work further on the question of how to ensure justice in the transition that this COP is also very much about. And he established a panel on critical energy transition minerals. And I'm telling you this because this is part of the story of how things go in the world and things go in the negotiations. Critical energy transition minerals, so needed for the transition away from fossil fuel. We have been calling as indigenous peoples to move us away from fossil fuel. But 54% of the critical energy transition minerals are on or near indigenous peoples' lands. And if we don't do a systemic change to the way that extractive industries operate, to the way that states operate in terms of the pressure to transition, it will not be a just transition. The track record shows that it is not a just industry. So as an example, that industry and the way we make decisions about transition needs to have a systemic change for it to be just. So this is where we can contribute, because our knowledge about how to do that in a just way is based on the experiences of decades of unjust ways of doing things and unjust ways of governing. I was honored to be a member of the panel, and I look forward to tomorrow, a high-level event where the Secretary General will convene some of us that were members and we will have a chance to talk more about that. The question will be if the report, which has a clear reference to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which recognizes the individual and collective rights of Indigenous peoples, and also talks of Indigenous peoples as not just passive spectators, but as active contributors, can also be a report that makes the very nice rings in the water to ensuring that we do the necessary change across the board. So my hope for this year's COP is that we truly get to take some more concrete steps in terms of understanding and have a common understanding among each other. What does justice entail? Ask ourselves the question, justice for who? And we have to be able to grasp that diversity and complexity in any policy making. And that includes those policy makings that we are doing here in terms of transitioning, but also in terms of focusing on cryosphere, for example, which is increasingly on the agenda, but to my big concern on the agenda without Indigenous peoples front and center in the way that it's done. Well, thank you. What would you like to share with us?
Thank you so much. While I do not want to impose my idea on the distinguished delegates here and all the policy makers here, I would like to share the story from the Himalayan kingdom in the hope that it will inspire many others around. In terms of environmental conservation and fighting against the challenges of climate change, Bhutan, despite being a small country, we had been really ambitious. We had been doing whatever is necessary with right policies and right leadership in place. There is an inspiration, there is a hope to fight against your size of the country, the population. It doesn't matter at all. You need to have a right mindset and you need to act on it. It has to be really deliberate. It has to integrate within the public policies, and it should be part of our living and way of life. For Bhutan, for guests who have no idea about where Bhutan is, we are a small, tiny Himalayan country between two giants of China to the north and India to the south. And our development, socio-economic development philosophy is being guided by the philosophy of cross-national happiness. And through that, ecological resilience and environmental conservation has been very fabric of our own society. And we have policy screening tools that takes into account, that takes into consideration the environmental aspects in terms of pollution, in terms of how we care, how we protect our environment. So through that, in fact, we have codified these policy provisions in our own country's constitution, and it mandates that we need to maintain minimum of 60% of forest cover at all times. And we have also made a commitment to ensure that we remain a carbon neutral for all times to come. And currently we are a carbon negative country. And if this story doesn't inspire, I don't know what will. But can Bhutan solve the challenges that we are facing? We cannot. I think everyone must rise up to the challenges. The climate change is transboundary in nature. We need to have a cooperative, and we need to come together, act, agree together. While we negotiate here, I totally agree that it's a really sophisticated and complex nature. But can we find a compromise? Can we come to an agreement to solve and do whatever is necessary? So that is one story among many that I would like to share here. And I really hope these stories will reverberate across the globe and have some inspiration to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, David. I really appreciate you being here. So what a joyous event. We are now going to move to the signing of the AMI Ambition on Melting Ice Declaration. And I would like to invite for the signing Pam Pearson, who is the director of ICCI, International Cryosphere Climate Initiative, and also head of the AMI Secretariat. I would like to invite with her Dr. Lohmann from Germany. Please join us again. Where is our Honorable Ahmed from Pakistan? He's joining us as well. No, not joining us anymore. And I would like to invite, we're so happy that you're here. Thank you for joining us. Stefan Gudmundsson, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of the Environment, Energy and Climate of Iceland. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Please join us. Yeah, probably. We're so happy that Iceland is here because, of course, two countries are the co-chairs of the Ambition on Melting Ice Declaration, Chile and Iceland. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you very much. So this concludes our events on the importance of cryosphere. Thank you also very much for being here, for attending. But don't run away just yet. We would love to invite you to join us for the opening ceremony of the Cryosphere Pavilion. We will lead the way towards the Cryosphere Pavilion. It's just a few minutes away. You can follow Pam and the early career scientists who will show you the way to the Cryosphere Pavilion. Again, thank you very much to all our speakers and thank you all for being here. Okay.